public policy, often enacted in the name of equity, may inadvertently contribute to this outcome, especially as we target early childhood interventions to our nation's lowest income children. That then began a conversation that brought together 4 partners: the Hunt Institute, the Century Foundation, the Manny Cantor Center, and their parent organization of Educational Alliance, and the Education Trust. Collectively, we have been working on recent months on a new issue brief that is designed to uplift the value of diversity and inclusion in early childhood settings. Not just racial and ethnic diversity, but diversity in all of its forms. That brief will be released next month and will hold a virtual event to help bring in a national audience to spread that awareness. Today, though, we wanted to begin the conversation with a look at how this topic plays out right here in New York City classrooms. We have 4 terrific panel discussions for you this morning, each designed to spotlight a different perspective. We'll hear from academics, we'll hear from practitioners, policymakers, and representatives of each partner organization. And of course, we will incorporate time for you all to pose questions. And afterward, we hope that you will plan to stay with us and join us for lunch. If our breakfast treats are any indication of lunch, I think we can all be pretty excited. On behalf of the partners, I'd like to extend a special thank you to Trust for Learning, whose support is making this project and this special day possible. In fact, you'll actually be able to meet Chrisanne Gale, who spearheaded this work a little later on this morning. And we are also joined today by Trust for Learning's Executive Director, Ellen Roche. Ellen and Chrisanne, we are so grateful for your support and helping to make this day possible. To kick things off today, it is my honor to welcome Kendra Purley, whose thoughtful reporting about young children and families is featured regularly in City Lab, the New Republic, the New York Times, the Washington Post, and elsewhere. Kendra will be moderating this morning's opening session and will introduce the panel. As she does, we welcome your panel to join us here at our table. Kendra, I turn it to you.
Good morning, everyone. It's wonderful to be here. This is one of my first in-person big events since for a couple of years, so it's great to see people in person and to continue this conversation that got started a couple of years ago in this very place. So I would like to introduce the panelists. The first panelist is Dr. Kara Ahmed, is Deputy Chancellor for Early Childhood at the New York City Department of Education. Okay. And we have also Yvette Sanchez Fuentes, is Vice President of National Policy at Start Early and the former Director of the Office of Head Start. So as mentioned, Okay, so Ms. Sanchez Fuentes is the Vice President for National Policy at Start Early and the former Director of the Federal Office of Head Start. Could you share more about the nation's preschool policy landscape and also what these policies mean for classroom diversity?
So, good morning, everyone. Buenos dias. Can everybody hear me? Hey. So, just first off, thanks to all the partners, the Hunt Institute, Trust for Learning, for this opportunity. Really looking forward to the conversation today. And thank you all for being here. We know that we have choices, right? Especially now that we're all coming back together. So just want to be thankful for your time today too. So I think as we're thinking about this conversation and we're thinking about the landscape of preschool at the national level, one of the things that we often notice is that as Lauren started out with, right, some of these policies that we have at the federal, the state, and the local level sometimes get in the way of what we actually want to do. And so what you do find, right, is that at the national level, you've got your major programs, Head Start, childcare, you've got Part C, you've got Part B that is at the Department of Education. But at the federal level, you see that you've got all of these programs across 2 major federal departments, all with good intentions, but with policies that don't align. So you've got Head Start, who's like moving ahead. They've been talking about community and equity and making sure that kids are given support in the most natural, organic environments. You've got childcare, which is really run at the state level. And so you've got state policies there and cultures and politics that then impact how states make decisions. And then you've got the local folks, which is really all of you who are taking all of those different pieces and putting them together in some puzzle that makes sense, maybe, right? But it's a lot of work, right? Because it's a lot of work for you all, and then it's a lot of work for our families and our communities who are trying to navigate these processes. And so
Thank you all so much for your remarks so far. I wanted to ask a little bit about, we talked a little bit about messaging and parents. I want to talk about that perception with what is Head Start to families, what is childcare to families, what is, public school, preschool. I was talking last week with a Head Start center in rural Alabama, and they were explaining how families love them for their 3-year-olds, and they work so hard to develop these relationships with them. And then when the child turns 4 and they're eligible for public school pre-K in Alabama, the families are very excited to move on to a new setting that they perceive as more academic, et cetera. I think all of us in the room sort of know about the public school community-based tensions that have played out a little bit in the early days of New York City's expanded preschool program. I guess what's your read, what's your vibe on how parents are picking up on some of the messaging of the differences in those settings and how they're making those choices, especially in this sort of new normal COVID world when they have different options to explore?
What's my read? My read is that we still have to do a better job at supporting the messaging around it to families and communicating accurately, honestly, and transparently about what all of these different settings have to offer and where there are shared vision and shared mission around each of them and where there are differences from running a 12-month program and 11-hour days for a number of working families or families attending school, and to those that might offer a continuity of care from birth to 5 or from 5 to 8-year-olds, right? And so I just think there's just more work to do. I think families know what they know in terms of what might be in their neighborhood or in their community, and often don't know what they don't know and what's available to them, and that's really our obligation and job. So I just don't think we are where we could be. And I don't think we are where we could be in terms of offering the services and supports to each of those programs so that whatever families decide to choose, that they're getting the most quality experience that they can possibly get within that setting that has so much to offer. But I think a lot of our role here and a lot of my role is going to be to ensure that we're getting all of the supports that we can to each of those different programs so they can provide optimal services to all families so that families, when we talk about family choice, it's got to be around access to high quality options. And so that's the work that has to happen. So we are doing, thinking about going back to some of our initial conversation about this sort of integration into a larger public school system. We're working for the first time really closely with our Office of School Enrollment partners in the DOE, who are typically centered around K-12 enrollment, K-12 advertisement, right, and branding and thinking about what that looks like so that the public is aware of what the options are. But now we're working really closely with them on figuring out ways to really make sure that we're messaging widely to family. There are options around family childcare, center-based programs, charter schools, and building that articulation between programs and communities. I gave a talk yesterday at the Charter School Center, and we talked a lot about finding some intentional structures and systems to help with that articulation. Charter schools serve pre-K, they don't serve birth to 5, but there's so many spaces and programs in the same local neighborhood that do. And could you imagine if we created some systems in between so that we can actually help families have that continuity of care within their own community and not finding ways to have to travel outside of their community to find that kind of continuum, so.
I would echo the messaging around making sure that it's simple, transparent, and straightforward for families. But I also would challenge us because I think that we sort of have spent the last couple of years trying to sort of make a distinction or not a distinction between early childhood and K-12. But the bottom line is that they are different. K-12 is different from early childhood. The culture is different, the systems are different, the funding is different. And so I also just have been having these random conversations about, is it time for us to actually make a distinction around what early childhood does and what happens for kids and families, and then what does happen when you go to K-12. They are significantly different, they're not the same. And so whatever it works for your community, you gotta figure out how to message that, I think, to families. And I think it's okay for families to love being in Head Start for their 3-year-olds and then being super excited about transitioning to K-12. But let's make sure that we understand why they're excited about it so that we can be really clear about what families should expect as they transition into a K-12 setting.
Thank you so much for having such a wonderful, insightful, and exciting conversation around children's inclusion, especially transitioning from EI into early intervention into IP and into kindergarten. Dr. Fuentes, thank you so much. I've been in Head Start for 31 years and also operate special classrooms in an integrated setting. On a local level, which is very different than the Department of Education, who is, I just have to say, a newbie to the whole system in serving children with disabilities. Because we've had such a wonderful collaboration with our provider who does give us that complement of inclusion and been doing that for so many years, we found that there's a dual system, unfortunately, that does exist between the referral process for children. And I just have to say that the power is in the parents, that for all of the work that you're doing, Dr. Ahmed, I really congratulate you for having a team. However, the one thing I did not hear was, how are you working with parents? Because they're the ones who really hold the force and the decision-making power in the enforcement of the law, that we all have to remember that everyone is entitled, any child who has a disability is entitled to those services. And if we educate our families about that fact and advocate for them, then there won't be a question when a dictate is made that they can no longer go on a tour. There's a big misconception that Head Start is just for children of color. Quite the contrary, quite the contrary. There's more Head Start programs in other white communities across the country. So this is a perception though in New York City that Head Start is a poverty program. It is not. It is not. I'm here to tell you that what you lay as a foundation in whatever spectrum that you're working in is the one that you have to be passionate about and be responsible for. After so many years of seeing families come through the doors and come back and say, this is what you've been able to do for me and my child, is very profound. But unless you have the passion and the commitment, then this system that we are faced with is not going to change until you, the ones that can make those decisions, start to be effective and listen to what is needed in order to make this process one that will be effective, that will make a change. That this New York City is in a crisis. I can't begin to tell you how many children are on the spectrum that I serve. And why is that? Why is that? My outcomes that I look at, so I say, okay, how many children do I have that have special needs? How many, where are they, and where are they getting referred to? Are they going to ICT? That's great. Or are they going to a self-contained classroom? That's my barometer of my effectiveness. So as you have established some type of guidelines for where you want to go within DOE and New York City, then do the same. Establish some outcomes. What are your measurements? What are you going to use as your barometer to say, okay, this is working? Because it's more than just refunding. It really goes way beyond that. So this is just a little food for thought. And thank you everyone for coming together and just thinking about the future of our children.
I guess I would ask, I heard the question there being, what will the barometers be?
Yeah, well, I think it's more than food for thought. I mean, I think it's right on point. So it is, and I think I've said that this is a beginning, it's certainly not an end, right? This is a process. All of the things that I think we're talking about, let's be clear, are informed by the parent experience. They have grown out of the fact that there has been an inequitable system for the families that we're in service to. The fact that families aren't aware of what their options or their rights are, or what their children are entitled to. These are things that need to happen through, again, putting systems in place to really understand how we can best support families so that they are fully aware of what they're entitled to and that we're making those things actually happen. And so, yes, there is, and I appreciate all of your comments because they're absolutely on the mark. This is a process that has to take place, that is crucial, that is critical, and it won't happen overnight, but we will make progress towards it through really, really, truly paying attention to what families are experiencing in this system. And for some families, they are well aware of what their rights are and can advocate for themselves, but there are a number of families that don't know and have been pushed through the system in ways that they trusted us. They trusted us to do the best for their children. Sometimes we did, and sometimes we just didn't. And those are things that we have to fix and we have to resolve. So what are some barometers? I mean, first of all, there are some things that we need to do to be a lot more proactive. We have screenings in place that are meant to and intended to really screen for potential developmental delays. Work that has to be done is using, not just implementing those screenings, but actually doing something with the data. Right? So it's one thing to check off our list and say in New York City we have a screening in place and every single teacher is required to use it and here are the times that they're required to use it throughout the year. But those are things that need to happen and happen consistently, and then that data and that information needs to be used in partnership with families to support next steps, to support planning, to have really informed decisions that are right. We need to be able to see results in reducing the number of children that we're just referring to self-contained classrooms when an IEP can call for a least restrictive environment that can be an inclusive classroom. And that does mean getting more service providers into that classroom so that that can happen. So those are some of the things that we're going to look at. Those are some of the things that we're going to strive to. But we do have a lot of work ahead of us. That's really no secret. I mean, it's very complex. It's very complicated. It doesn't have to be, but it is. And it's years of work that needs to be sort of unpacked, uncovered, dismantled, and reimagined and really revised for the sake of families. So thank you for that question and for all of your comments. I do appreciate it.
So I think we have time for about one more question. If there's anyone.
Hi, good morning, and I really appreciate being here. So Dr. Ahmad, I have a question for you, because I am a Head Start grantee, a direct grantee with no relationship with the DOE. And your focus seems to be on the DOE and what the DOE is doing. However, where is the seat at the table for those of us who are CBOs, who are direct Head Start program? What is the plan to include us if we're planning to serve all the children in New York City? I think that's a disconnect that is happening right now. So it's as if the Head Start, early Head Start children who are under the purview of CBOs are left out to dry. So what is the plan? What is the Chancellor's plan to have an inclusive service? We're talking about inclusion here. How are we going to include all of us to make sure our children survive?
Yeah. So So there are Head Start direct grantees that are not affiliated with the DOE, and there are a number of unaffiliated providers across the city that are not affiliated with the DOE, all serving, to your point, all of our children. And so we've already begun to have discussions with unaffiliated providers across the DOE, and not in a very, I will be very frank, not in any kind of very intentional system yet, few months in, but definitely something that is a priority. We're working closely with our city agency partners at City Hall that are looking to form a real advisory council that brings together not just our DOE contracted providers, but representing the entire city, right? So DOE has work to do, and we have to do it with our DOE contracted providers. We've got to start somewhere, and that's a big piece of it. But to your point, there's a value, and we would be remiss if we didn't do this, of bringing together all of our stakeholders that are touching every single life of every single child in the city. Because ultimately, and our hope would be that they end up in the K-12 system, right? So they are all of our children. So that work is underway. I do understand that City Hall is going to be, hopefully very soon, putting together this group of stakeholders that are DOE and non-DOE affiliated providers, which would include some of our Head Start direct grantees that are not part of the DOE, because absolutely, we all need to be part of that conversation, absolutely.
So thank you so much. Thank you to the panelists. That was a great discussion. And also, the early childhood field is so complex. There's so many different funding streams. There's so many different settings to be served in. And this is really incredibly complicated work. So, so thank you to everyone. It's great to have this discussion.
Okay, let's give this panel one more huge round of applause. Thank you all. As they transition off, and we'll go ahead and call up our next panel to go ahead and take their place at this table. I want to share with you all a few quick things. You've now seen how the structure of our presentations will go. So as you're hearing from our resource experts, and questions might arise, or a point might be that might spark a thought, make sure you jot that down, because you'll have the opportunity to come up here and ask our panel. In addition, our resource experts, our presenters, a majority of them will be able to stay with us for the day. So during our break and during lunch, they will be here. So please feel free to connect with them, ask a follow-up question, make those connections, etc. I promise we will have a break after this next panel here. But I am very excited for this next one, as it is the Professional Perspectives panel. And what better way to really drive this point home and this topic home than that of our individuals who are living it and breathing it every single day. So with that, I would like to introduce our moderator, Jamie Davidson-Credit, Executive Director here at the Manny Cantor Center.
Demographic diversity on paper is one thing, but it's meaningless absent community and absent really deliberate work around inclusion. And so to that point, the four incredible women to my right are all leaders of organizations that are diverse and truly inclusive. That work doesn't just happen on its own. As I said, demographic diversity on paper is very different from an inclusive community, and it takes incredibly skillful, thoughtful, strategic work. So I'm really excited to be with you all. You are all truly transformative leaders, and I'm really looking forward to hearing what you have. Our combination of Head Start and our private preschool in 2018 and has done an incredible job, and I'm eager to have her share some insights from that with you. Willing Chima is the deputy director of deputy executive director, of the Grand Street Settlement. She's been there since 1998, serving in a variety of capacities, and now she is working hard to expand their early childhood care. May Jordan is a first grade teacher at East Village Community School. She's been a teacher for 18 years has taught pre-K through 4th grade. So definitely have a lot to learn from her. And finally, Diane D. Spielberg has been the principal of the neighborhood schools for 9 years. And before that was a teacher in K2 classrooms and also in 5th grade classrooms. Great. Well, thank you again for being here. Jacqueline, I want to start with you. Can you guys hear me? I can't tell if I'm too loud or too quiet. But I want to start with you. As I said, under your leadership in 2018, MCC combined Head Start with our private preschool, becoming the most uniquely diverse private preschool in New York City. Can you tell us a little bit about that experience?
Sure. Can you hear me? Okay. This is my favorite thing to talk about. It took 6 years. So I wrote some notes because I've been given 4 minutes to describe the story. As we all know, de facto segregation across New York City preschools exists. Currently, as our earlier panelists said, enrollment in these schools are dependent on families' ability to pay tuition or to meet eligibility requirements for public programs. Like many of you in this room, we began to wonder why the system was set up this way in the first place. Like, if you think about it, actually, why did we, as a country, as a community, as a city, why was it set up this way in the first place? And then, in particular, here at the Manny Cantor Center, which, as Jamie described, is located in this incredibly diverse community. You know, you probably saw that walking here in terms of, you know, each way each of you probably got here, you saw a little bit of the neighborhood, but from a completely different perspective. And this diverse community exists. And then here in the center, we too have both types of these programs. One that was funded by tuition, and one that was funded by Head Start. And the programs sat side by side, probably since 1965. We were one of the first Head Start grantees here, and we had a tuition-based preschool since the founding of the center, you know, over a century ago. And so since 1965, these two schools kind of grew up side by side. And so as we see it across the city, you know, you might not notice it, or you could kind of ignore it, or, you know, you don't have to deal with it on every morning. But here, as families and children came to school every day, you push 2 on the elevator button and it means one thing, and you push 3 and it means something else. And so for us, every day was a reminder of the stark inequities that exist in this city. And so we set out on the path, both to discover why, like the real why, with the goal to impact change, knowing that this couldn't continue, at least for us, in a community center, in a diverse neighborhood, with diverse families, children and families and teachers. And so here's a little bit of that story. So first I wanted to unpack the lore, actually, that funders would not allow this integration, because as we began this process, that was one of the first things that we heard. Head Start won't allow it, the Department of Education won't allow it, tuition-paying families would never want to be together. And kind of one by one, as we started to meet with each of these groups, we began to learn actually that it was exactly that, lore. We heard from each of the funders actually that there was a path to create a blended program and to incorporate many different types of funding together. There was lots of doubt along the way, lots and lots of doubt. Why would you want to do that? One funder says. Another funder says, but that would make your finances really complicated. Yes, all of those things are true, but what we heard, or what I heard, was the yes. There was a yes in there. Yes, this is possible. And so we took that and we found that path. From there, we sought to understand the teacher and the family perspectives about this integration. On the family side, we heard really loud and clear that our families, our neighborhood families, wanted to be together. Many questions came up, often daily, from families asking, why are there 2 schools? I would give tours of our schools here, and families, it was so confusing to people. They just kept saying, well, I don't understand, why is it separate? And so each time I just kept raising up these things and adding it to our checklist of like, we need to do this, we need to do this. Families are interested in this. for a period of time, there were actually families that did not enroll here, specifically because they saw it as a segregated program, that was a problem and a reason to actually go somewhere else. Those programs are also segregated, right? But you didn't see it quite in the same way. Hold on, I lost my train of thought. And so then we knew on the family side that this would not just be accepted, but that this would be celebrated. So that was another, yes. On the teacher side, I would say that was the most sensitive component to handle. We had 2 schools in this building with 2 different philosophies, 2 different leaderships, 2 different, everything that had grown up over not just a few years, but in this case, decades. We had one traditional, more traditional Head Start funded program with deep family engagement and really strong social work support. We also had a progressive preschool that was lauded for its work and co-constructed curriculum. And so as we sought to come together as one integrated school, what we did was we took the best of both of those schools. So the deep family engagement, strong social work support, along with co-constructive curriculum and programs of education, as we thought to envision what this new school or this integrated school would look like. For our teachers, I would say at first they were hesitant. Change is uncomfortable and hard. And our teachers, at the same time, knowing that this would be hard and uncomfortable, also agreed that this was a necessary step for our school and our community, and they rose to the possibilities ahead. So there were our yeses, right? We've got the back-end finances, we've got the families and teachers, and we just needed to move forward. So we began small. It was with joint sing-alongs and shared professional development. We then moved on to integrate all of the 4-year-old classrooms in our school. And then in 2020, amidst 2020, the global pandemic, we were able to launch a fully integrated early childhood center here at the Manny Cantor Center with 17 classrooms and 200 children. And here we are. As I look back on that first year, which also was 2020, I think for me and for our school here, the most interesting thing about it actually was how smooth it was. And I use smooth intentionally because there were all these other things going on, right? Like anyone who works in a school, works around schools, all that other stuff. But for the first time, our children and families were together. We had a celebration of the linguistic, racial, cultural, socioeconomic diversity of our neighborhood and community here together. And it was really the first time for me in this building, in our school, that the school felt just right. And this is how it should be. It's possible. I might have gone more than 4 minutes.
It was worth every minute. And so we are so lucky that our students have schools and settings in the neighborhood that they can move on to that are equally transformative. And one of those schools is the neighborhood school where, as I mentioned, Dianthe is the principal. Dianthe and her school pride themselves on prioritizing diversity in every aspect of their school. Dianthe was also a leader in District 1's initiative to restructure admissions processes to improve access and diversity in the neighborhood. Can you talk to us a little bit about what the impetus was for this and how it's going?
Okay, so can you hear me? I'm just, before I start, I just want to say how much I appreciate this and how much I appreciate being here as a pre-K through 5th grade principal. And I was very inspired by Vet and Dr. Ahmed's comments, but especially inspired by the questions. So I'm looking forward to just continuing the conversation. So just to give you a little context about the neighborhood school, we were actually located in the Lower East Side. We were right up the street a little bit on East 3rd Street and Avenue A. We're a small school with about 250 students, and our population is fairly diverse. We have about 35% white students, and then the rest of the students are BIPOC. students of color. We have a small percentage of L students in our school, and about 25% of our kids are students with disabilities, and that includes pre-K, that includes a pre-K population. So I also sort of want to comment that our school is not really reflective of the schools in the Lower East Side. So there are 4 schools in the Lower East Side that demographics are actually fairly similar to ours, and those are 4 progressive schools in the Lower East Side, and they've all been around for about 30 years or so. But the rest of the schools in District 1 usually look disproportionately black and brown. Students with disabilities are much higher percentage in those schools.
Childcare is one component of the Head Start, about the settlement model that we have been part of, since we've been established. Being grand, we've been here for over a century in the Lower East Side, and being a vibrant community, bringing neighbors together, and believing in our families, because that builds a stronger network for families. And Grand Street Settlement is a diverse community with different approaches to serve families of different backgrounds. And that's so important for us. And we're inspired each day, everything that we do. The settlement house model, lies at the heart of the family. We're grassroots, okay? We go where the families are. Low-income families live in nature facilities, families that live in shelters, right? Because shelters are families in the community here, and we go out to the shelters to reach out to those families and to talk with them and to bring them into our programs, because we have the holistic approach. So in the early 1980s, we saw a vision to branch out Grand Street Settlement into Brooklyn, into the public schools, into the child care programs. And it wasn't until early 2000 where we had our first child care center in Brooklyn, which doubled our portfolio of early childhood programs. We're a great partner of DOE. We also have blended funding from the Office of Head Start, 3K, pre-K. So we have all the comprehensive options and models to support our families in our centers, which makes us holistic at the approach that we service our family. The blended model does work. The blended model with funding does work, but it does require effort, due diligence, and also commitment of the agency. And we're committed. We're committed to serving. And we serve over 900 families in our early childhood program. And we also provide support for the family child care centers, where many of these families open up their homes, right, to serve the families in their neighborhood and their community, which is wonderful. And that is something that we wanted to bring to the partnership, because it's a partnership with childcare and family childcare. We have the Head Start experience, we have the comprehensive services, so we layer in additional funding for these programs to thrive. And to thrive is the way how families come together. And during, the last, 25 years that I have been there, the funding has been more comprehensive and more flexible that I have seen, because of all the advocacy work that the community has been doing, and Grand Street has been part of that grassroots advocacy work. It requires, everyone coming together, and Grand Street Settlement has been able to build on these milestones to improve the quality of childcare. And I don't know if anybody was listening before. How old is Head Start? Who remembers? Yeah, 57, the month of May. So our little ones are celebrating Head Start right now in the classrooms, which is wonderful because that brings families together. So our core value is based on providing quality services for the entire family, not exclusive just only for the children in our child care program, because families need the support, the mental health services, the health services, the educational services, and especially for the kids that have special needs. We have integrated classrooms in our Head Start program, in our child care program. So the model does work, but it requires flexibility and creativity to come together to bring all those resources together. So 2 generations, you hear about this all the time. What does it really mean? Well, that's what a settlement house model is bring families, grandparents, parents, their siblings, and then the early childhood program, the younger kids, bringing all the families together so the parents could go to work, because that's what families want. They want to go to work, they want to have a safe place for their children, and we're able to do that because we're able to be part of the community and do this work together. It requires work together, not in silos, because the community is made of different people and different programs, and that's where Education Alliance and Grand Street Settlement have partnerships for many decades, way longer than I have been at Grand Street also. So this is an awesome time that we're talking about this, and it's a time that we all have to think creatively, thinking out of the box.
So my school, my schools, some of the supports that we're receiving is first and foremost the professional development. We've been reading a book by Goldie Muhammad, which, you know, if you know her, she is a professor at a school, and her work, or she is at the forefront of the work of rethinking curriculum, access point to actually making sure that when we are teaching children that we're actually teaching them with a sense of trueness. And when I say truth, I think of the terms of like what actually has occurred historically. What were many of the misconceptions that many of you and I, when we went to school, we were taught about the fact of maybe not knowing that there were many African Americans or people of color that have actually contributed to many of the things that we use today. So that is the first thing that we, do as a school in terms of support. The second thing that we do as a school, which is my school is the East Village Community School, is we are also a very small community. We are also a very small school. We are in the same district, District 1, is that we support each other. And in thinking of supporting each other, having real conversations that many times may be uncomfortable, surrounding race or surrounding, disabilities or surrounding the misconceptions, and actually talking about it and not holding a grudge against anyone that may say something that may feel a little bit wrong, but actually thinking of that as a teaching point and then reflecting. That's another thing that's a big support, is given the space and time to actually reflect on what you've heard, reflect on what you've learned, and then taking that and bringing that into your classroom, and also reflecting on what your students are giving back to you once they receive your instruction.
Once again, Manny, just hearing you speak, I'm super inspired by the work that you do, and just wish that more kids in our city had access to teachers like you. And it also makes me think about recruiting and retaining and developing high quality staff. And I'd love to hear you speak, Willing, about how you think about staff development, how you think about retaining your best people, and what it looks like to cultivate and grow people like May in your organization.
Oh, definitely. In the last 2 years, it's been very difficult for our families, and especially during the pandemic. We have seen many of our pre-K kids fall behind and not meeting the developmental appropriate domains. Physical activity is one of them, and social and emotional connections. We have a lot of work to be done, and our staff and our teachers are the greatest resource. And we're partnering with mental health providers to support the families and support the teachers, because our teachers are our greatest asset to high quality program. And one of the things that we have done, I'm going to talk a little bit about 3 partnerships that have inspired and helped us thrive during this pandemic, and how our families have embraced the services that we provide to them, and to support them and to encourage them. And many of our programs are in Manhattan and in Brooklyn, in Sunset Park, and also in Bed-Stuy and Bushwick, and also the Lower East Side here in District 1. The 3 partnerships that I'm going to talk a little bit about how to help our teachers, right? And one of the things that we have done, that we do know that hiring teachers and maintaining teacher qualifications is tough right now. A lot of the veteran teachers are retiring or stepping down and doing other fun stuff in their lives. So we're challenged, and I think this is across the nation, with teacher credentials and hiring high qualified teachers. So what we have done as an agency to build this platform and a way for teachers to stay with Grand Street and to want to come to Grand Street Settlement to work and to serve the community families is that we created a sign-on bonus, giving teachers who want to come to the community center, are multilingual, want to work with families in our community centers. We were able to partner with foundation dollars to give enhancements to the teachers as the minute they come on board on top of their regular salary, because we value them, we want them to stay with us. And we're gonna continue to put this merit bonuses in the portfolio to support them financially, because we want our teachers to thrive. And that was something that the board of directors at Grand Street Settlement and executive team made a commitment to in the last 2 years. And the beginning of this calendar year, we retained 9 teachers that were graduating and that were moving from, their internships to come to work at Grand Street Settlement. So the sign-on bonus is a great initiative, and giving, teachers the value that the work that they're doing is important. And we're continuing to empower our teachers. The other item that we were doing with teachers is a career pathway to helping our teachers, our current teachers, to complete their certifications, right? So what we have done is that we have our flexible schedules for the teachers, so they could do their internships, and they could also be able to take their classes, and then we were able to find substitutes and teachers to come in so they could go and complete their certifications and exams. The other item that really helped was we paid for their exams, and we also paid for the coaches to come in to support the teachers to be able to pass the exams. And that's one thing that we saw a need in as we were talking to the teachers. And the teachers value that because it was an opportunity for them to share what they were struggling with in not getting their certification or finishing up their schoolwork, because they had to balance schoolwork and also their own family life too, and also working. So it was multiple layers that we supported our teachers. These are teachers that have worked with us and just need to get the certifications. So that was the career pathway. And then we also partner with local community schools that have teaching degrees, and supporting them and coming to Grand Street Settlement as their final year, as they're graduating, and doing an internship with us, and then giving them a stipend to complete the work that they're doing, and then also be able to teach. So we have to find creative ways to retain and to recruit teachers, and this is something that we are deeply committed to, because we know having high quality inclusive classrooms, we need the teachers that speak multiple languages, Spanish, Chinese, and being able to communicate and work with the families and work with the kids, because 99% of our kids are dual language learners that come from families that are immigrant families that don't have the resources and don't have the connections, so we were able to provide that. The other partnership that we had for the last 2 years is City Harvest. Many of our families struggle to put food on the table. And I was so surprised when I saw the report that just in the last 18 months, we were able to give out 1 million pounds of food, okay, fresh food. And I was so surprised. I said, I don't even know what 1 million pounds looks like, right? but we did it because we knew the families needed the resources. And not just only giving out the foods, but having the parents being engaged in helping us create a recipe book of all different types of food that they were getting at the food pantry. And they were able to cook the foods with their kids at home. And they were able to learn about the different types of food with the teachers in the classroom. So we were connecting the classrooms in the home. I think that's very important for our teachers. And our teachers embraced that because they saw value in helping the children to learn how to use the food in their home. And the parents were talking and reading about it. And we printed the recipe book, and we were giving it out to the community, and people were saying, wow, this is awesome. It's just very simple things, such as making smoothies, making a salad, or cutting up some vegetables with the young kids. So they were building parent and child relationships, and having that opportunity for the kids to be engaged with the families at home. And having that parent involvement helped us to understand that parents want to be engaged. Parents wanted to to be part of the, the conversations. But we just had to find ways to do it, that it wasn't extra work. It was also part of the cooking and getting the meals prepared. And during the time when we were all on Zoom, we had cooking classes on Zoom, and the kids were thriving. And I actually, attended one of the classes with them, and the kids were having fun cutting up the vegetables and putting strawberries in the blender to make smoothies. So these are the conversations that we're having to bring all different types of food of different ethnic groups and different cultures to share with other families that may not have the opportunity to understand that. So the other opportunity, the other partnership that we had was bringing kids to build up their literacy. And we partnered with Blossom. Blossom is a software company that provided tablets for our families to bring the books home in their own language, and they were able to learn it together with families. So we encourage parents to read with their kids, but we didn't just say, go pick a book. We provided 50 books in the tablet that they're gonna be championing and reading with their kids throughout the school year. And we're achieving the 50 right now, and that is amazing because families enjoy the interaction with their kids. So reading the books in their own language. And right now we have close to 100 children and about 30 teachers involved with this. And we're seeing great outcomes of children learning to read different languages in Spanish and English right now. Eventually, in probably the next school year, we're going to be launching our Chinese curriculum, where the kids will be learning Chinese at the same time and reading it with their parents. So we saw parent engagement is so valuable to building this inclusive community because parents brought conversations to the table and brought these issues to the table at the center. So we actually listen and embrace them and ask them how to help the center to thrive. And I think that's the key. When they see their children thriving, they're thriving too.
And I just wanted to shout out all of you. This is what community and partnership and collaboration looks like. So we know you're busy, we know how much you all have going on, and I just want to acknowledge and thank you for taking the time to be in community with us like this. It's really meaningful, and we deeply, deeply appreciate your thoughtfulness around these topics. So with that, if there are any questions for our panelists, you can make your way up to the mic.
Good morning. Thank you so much for this event. I think it's wonderful. I wanted to say thank you to all of you. As a former preschool teacher and someone who's prepared teachers for over 10 years, I really appreciate hearing all of your positive stories about how you support your teachers, how you come together as a community, how you collaborate, all the different partnerships you have. So I've taught in a number of institutions across states, and one of the frustrations that our pre-service candidates have always expressed is, you're teaching us about the ideal of inclusion, but we don't see it when we go into the community. And there's so much work that you do. It's so heartening to hear all of these experiences. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about, and Willing had talked a little bit about how you're helping to support teacher candidates kind of come through and get their certification, but I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about plans to include faculty or partner with faculty so that, number one, they're aware of the resources, the programs, how community is being supported so that they can teach not just the ideals about what inclusion is, but also here's what's actually happening in our neighborhoods, here's what's happening in New York City. That I found was more powerful for students to learn from, and then they could come back and kind of share examples of here's what I saw here, here's what I saw here, and this kind of relates back to Dr. Ahmed and Yvette Sanchez-Fuentes' comments about teachers feeling ill-equipped, but then knowing here's how the policies work, here's how I work outside, within the box to be more creative to support children and families. So I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about that.
Sure, great question. And we have created partnerships with the MCC and Cuny Schools at this current time. And yes, we do talk to the faculty advisors, and yes, we do create a forum for the students to learn about community-based programming, because that's the key. It's learning how to be a comprehensive to include the families in the conversations when you're talking about children. It's not just having the child in the classroom. So the professors have provided technical support during the students who are in our program. And we have this clear communication of what the expectations are and what the trainings and the opportunities that we give on site, helping the staff, because some of them are staff, some of them are interns. So we have two pathways. We have people that are not part of the program coming in as interns, and we also have staff that become interns. So we build up these buddy systems and have these roundtable discussions internally to create and foster inclusion and conversations with teachers and student teachers and interns. So it has created this opportunity for interns to be inspired to be a teacher, right? Because that's what we want them to do, and we want them to embrace the children, depending on what if they're 3s or 4s, right? Age appropriate, curriculum too. So those conversations do take place, and we really want to build on this milestone that we have created to include other schools. So if there are other schools out there that want to partner with, Graduate Settlement, other agencies, please reach out to us, because I think it's valued, because otherwise we're creating teachers that are not familiar with what the communities are doing, and not having the feeling of it, and not knowing how to engage the families, because it's all due about conversation and using the proper language and using the approach to embrace families at all different levels.
I just wanted to also add, what you said, it just hit me, really, in terms of thinking of the fact that I am also a teacher of color, and that you are absolutely correct. And there's a book that I read, and the term that was used to describe what you're talking about is called a pool of exclusion. So when, our committees come together and they're looking for pools of teachers, or they're interviewing, there's only a certain amount from a certain particular school in a particular area of New York City, which then provides for teachers that all look the same, that all have the same experience, that all speak to the same sort of upbringing, which, as you said, can then bring along the continuity of what we're trying to do in terms of dismantling the system and dismantling many other things that are going on, in terms of the system of teaching. One of the things that I have done in my school, and also many other people as well, is actually talking about it and bringing it to light, and bringing the fact that within our or many staff members, they are made up of white teachers. And unfortunately, in New York City, it is still true to this day that the majority of teachers are white, and that there is power in seeing teachers of different ethnicities and different races and different colors or different genders, or no matter what it is, there's power in that, and that speaks to children in such a way and says that it is okay to look this way, it is okay to see this person in this way, or that it is okay to be this person and to aspire to what this person is in my life. So I absolutely agree with you and commend what you're doing and partnering with schools that are not necessarily thought of as the Ivy League schools, or the schools that are most affluent.
I just want to add on to what May said, which is that over the past 9 years or so, the neighborhood schools staff has really shifted in the diversity. About 61% of our teachers, paras, and service providers are of color. And that has been, and if we just look at the classroom teachers, it really doesn't drop. It's about 57%.
Really excited to continue our conversations here. Our morning has just been phenomenal so far. We have heard from multiple layers to the system, leaving us most recently with professional perspectives and those who are on the ground doing the work. As we mentioned earlier in this morning in kind of our welcoming remarks, there is an issue brief being developed and being authored by all 4 partners. And with it come policy recommendations and considerations, kind of lifting up the conversations that we have had already. And that's really where our next session is going to dig deeper into. We call it our partner policy recommendations. So with that, I'd like to introduce our moderator, Chris Ann Gale, once again, Chief Strategy and Policy Officer of Trust for Learning.
everyone hear me? Right. Thank you so much, Lauren. And I really want to extend a thank you to the amazing organizations that have collaborated together on this work. I know that it can be challenging sometimes to come up with unified policy recommendations across different organizations with different missions and different goals. Donna Anderson, who is pinch hitting for us today, Deputy Executive Director at the New York Early Childhood Professional Development Institute, it's a mouthful, and Dr. Dia Bryant, who's the Executive Director of the Education Trust in New York. So thank you all. Well, I'd like to kick it off and start with something that has been alluded to already, which is we all know that the early childhood environment is very different in many ways than K-12. Very different funding streams, many different regulatory agencies, requirements, etc. Also, many different providers. A number of different providers in the home care setting, in the center-based setting, school-based setting. So the first question really is around what recommendations, given this complexity of the ecosystem in early childhood that exists, what recommendations around funding and mixed delivery specifically have partners identified in this brief to help to achieve diverse classrooms? I'm going to throw that one to Jason first.
Good morning, everybody. I think it's highly important to really understand the dynamics of what you're trying to achieve in the classroom, and what are the resources that you have identified that not just the children are going to need, right? When you have a child in your classroom, you essentially have a family that's in the classroom, right? So what is the ecosystem that you need to implement in order to really create that dynamic, right? To really create the support structure so that we are scaffolding properly, not just from a direct service perspective, but from a holistic approach, right? And really doing the deep dive work and understanding the multiple different levels of literacy that your children are going to have in your classrooms and the diverse backgrounds that they're coming from. So one of my colleagues earlier mentioned true integration. And what does true integration really look like, right? So true integration from a front-facing perspective is important, but then also understanding what are the back-end items that really need to be truly integrated as well, so that then you can create the revenue streams that are then going to be able to funnel the resources in the proper directions and where we need to go to, right? So really understanding that as a program, you need to explore, educate, set expectations, and really equip everybody in your atmosphere to be successful, and taking all those little interests.
At the risk of being a little too policy wonky, I'm wondering if you could expand a little bit on which actual funding streams you are blending and grading at Manny Cantor to do that.
Yes. So we have a private tuition preschool. We have a Head Start program, Head Start, Early Head Start, and home base. Then we have 3K, we have UPK, and then in addition to that, we have a myriad of foundational supports as well, right? So I'm going to throw a number out that is a little bit scary. We have identified internally that in order for us to provide the proper services at the adequate levels that we want, it costs us $38,000 per child, right? And I throw out that number, it's scary because there's not one single funder right now in our atmosphere that is going to give you $38,000 for you to provide the wraparound services and all holistic approaches that we need to be able to put in. So you're really trying to piecemeal, right, funding sources and really trying to go into the proper direction. I spend a lot of my day having a lot of side conversations. So I'll go and I have a conversation with a teacher, I'll have a conversation with a family service worker, I'll have a conversation with a director, and I'm exploring what are the needs of the programs, right? When we're talking about true integration, it's not just true integration of the program, but how is then your financing going to understand what are the needs? Because not all money is also good money for your program, right? That is a big thing that sometimes we get caught up in. where it's like, we need the money because we have a $200,000 deficit that we're trying to fill for next year because this program model that we want. Right? When I mentioned earlier multiple literacies, is a funder is going to give you money and they're going to care about what they're giving you money for. You can have the wonderful story, which is where the data comes in, qualitative and quantitative, which are super important to get the funders on board. But then how are you going to then meet that funder's expectations while then also creating an inclusive environment within your program? Right? Because now, let's say for example, I'm looking at Head Start. And I love Head Start. I was just at the NHSA conference in Baltimore about 2 weeks ago. And being surrounded in that environment, you realize that everyone here is a champion, right? Head Start is not a program, like someone mentioned before, that's for the poor. I'm going to steal a direct line. Head Start is a program for the future of the country, right? We are not in the business of servicing generational families of Head Start because then that means that we fail, right? So how are we then creating the policies and working with partners so that when we're transitioning our families from grade levels or from early Head Start to Head Start, what does that look like? And then what does that look like when we're transitioning them from center-based programming then to grade school, right? And that's why it's important from a policy perspective and what funding resources you're putting together to have those in-depth conversations. What we've realized in the last 2 years, 3 years, is that funders are willing to work with you, but there has to be open conversations about what you're doing, right? Because ultimately you have to be able to cross your T's and dot your I's, because if people are looking at you and saying, well, how are you making this work? Then you want to make sure that what you're delivering is on point so that the next time around when the money's available, then you're getting it. Right? So if I'm having a conversation, not to throw the DOE or put the DOE in a certain situation, right? We are a direct funded program for Head Start, but we also do have a partnership because we offer 3K and UBK. So we've been offered an extension this year for a 3K and UBK program, so we can continue to have integrated classrooms. But then what the DOE is asking is, okay, how many children do you have in your classroom? How many are Head Start? How many are DOE? What does that allocation look like? What percentages are going somewhere? Right? And then if you're open and transparent in that perspective, then they're willing to fund you. Maybe not at the same level as a standalone program, but it allows that conversation point to happen so that then there is an ability for maybe the city to put together an RFP that takes into consideration direct grantees to still bring them into that ecosystem to have those conversations. And being innovative is really important because if you're innovative, then you're going to attract the resources that you need to be able to fill in those gaps, right? And I think that is very important for strategy.
How to do this work, and how do we communicate that? Like, how do we communicate your experience so that other programs can do this and do and offer those experiences as well? So I think, from my perspective, it's really about how are we building the system? What are we putting into place to provide the opportunities for the current workforce, and then of course to recruit into the workforce and making sure that people who really want to work with children have the opportunity to do so.
And is there anything you wanted to add to that from on behalf of the paper?
Yes, I would say from the policy recommendations in terms of course, supporting the workforce and growing that in terms of diversity. As we said, we know that demographically similar teachers, they increase family engagement when they are the same, or better perceptions and expectations of young children when they are similar. It decreases discipline rates and other things of that nature. But I also wanted to mention too, while we want to increase the workforce and ensure that they are diverse, think about the systematic output. Maybe revising how we can support teachers in revising our standards, or thinking about the quality improvement systems we have. Are those curriculum that we provide for teachers in the classroom, are those standards also aligning to support inclusive thoughts and to push diversity within the classroom? So we know that children relate to curriculum when it reflects their lives. So are we ensuring that it's not only on the teachers, but what are the curriculum we're bringing in? How can we work with universities or different organizations that are providing that and kind of preparing teachers to be in the classroom? What are some of those things that I think can also be improving and changing?
I can add something to that. I think it's very important to really create a learning community, right, and a learning environment. Everyone here is an educator, right? But how are you taking that from our perspective to kids and the families, then to also then internally to your staff and your program and your leadership, and creating kind of like this agile mindset where we are in a changing environment consistently, and how are we implanting that kind of mentality into the program, right? Where we're consistently learning, we're consistently assessing, and then we're pivoting for best practices, not from a deficit perspective, but this is the nature of the work that we do. Like, we learn something every single day. Even if you are the teacher, in the middle of you doing a lesson, you might learn something else, right? How is someone receiving your lesson? How is a parent like reacting to something that you said? And then how are we taking that and really pushing that forward so that then we're creating this community of consistency of trying to just get better, right? And then how are we expanding it from our own program to a community like this, right? And we continue to put these kind of events forward and pushing that message.
Thank you. We heard in our second panel a lot of talk, great examples about ways that programs are providing wraparound services for families and for children. And I mean, we obviously know that in expanding inclusive preschool settings, it's not only impacting young children's development, but it's really about involving and supporting families. I'm curious, Dia, maybe you can take this one. What are some ideas that are included in the paper around programming that can help meet the needs for all families? And particularly, I'm wondering, what are the types of programs, services, practices that can help for families, that can help to promote especially racial, ethnic, and socioeconomic diversity in preschool?
I'm actually really glad that you said that last line, because that's where I was going to start. You know, we sort of use the word diversity, and everyone sort of has this conflation with race. And I just want to clear up that diversity is also about our neurodivergent children. It's about, you know, socioeconomic diversity. It's about so many dimensions. Like, just think of yourself and all of the parts of you, right? And all that you bring to the table. And so what we know is that most of our kids are actually sitting in segregated early childhood classrooms. And you're going to read in the paper that the strongest segregation is actually in early childhood classrooms, and it's generally along socioeconomic lines and racial lines. And it is actually an unintended consequence of our focus on access, right? We said everyone gets access, but we didn't think through the homogeneity that would come as a result of saying, now this neighborhood has, and so the entire neighborhood, because we've concentrated poverty in this country as a result of redlining, we have to think in ways that are not American normative, right? I think that there is just so much more to family now. You know, grandma, auntie, cousin, brother, sister. I mean, I was a principal in East New York, Brooklyn, and most of my family all live in one house, right? Like the whole family is together. And then there are you know, families where folks are adopted and are foster homes. Like, there's just so much, and I think we serve to the middle. When in actuality, I think we should be designing from the margin. Because when we design from the margin, we actually end up being able to suit everyone. Everyone in this room loves that little ramp when you cross the street, right? It helps us push our carts and all of that. But it's actually designed for folks who have wheelchairs. But it helps us all. So there's this need to really think outside of this sort of middle place and start from those who have been most marginalized and most forgotten in our systems.
Anyone else want to speak to that? If not, I want to move on to a couple other recommendations that are in the paper, specifically around research and data. The last two recommendations focus on the importance of including research and data within this conversation. And in order to really evaluate current practices, we do need to have reliable research and transparent data. So I'm wondering if you can share with us some of your thoughts about how research and data can be used to help to support future change in this area. We can open up to anybody who might want to take a stab at that.
I'll start because I guess we're the data people. Ed Trust, we are a data-driven organization. It's just what we do. And there is a significant need for more data. So much of the data that we get has suppression, missing information. We don't always get the demographic breakouts that we need to be able to point to the ails of specific groups. There's also a need to really track, early intervention. I could stand on this table and talk about that for 3 years because it is so difficult to get information around who's getting it, who's not getting it, where is it concentrated. We don't have good information, and that information is critical to be able to point out where the gaps are.
I would say, so as a policy analyst at the Hunt, we work with legislators and governors and policymakers, and we have meetings constantly where they're talking about where can we get the data and how we need to improve integrated data systems for different states. That is a huge issue that I know plagues a lot of policymakers. And then where does policy, how is it driven through data? And so with my work, I'm constantly pulling information to provide to these states, but as systems, we have to, as Gia was saying, provide, capture more information, disaggregate that, make sure that, okay, when we're sharing with policymakers what is the problem, who is the problem for, which specific communities, which areas in their states, and so just increasing that. And I would also say, while this quantitative research and these data and numbers definitely push policy, I know today heard the thread of listening to the voices of others. So as a trained qualitative researcher, while these data systems are very important, where are the places where we are including the qualitative work? Hearing the voices of our parents, hearing the voices of our educators, as I believe Yvette was saying, we have to shift and change it where, okay, what do they need while we continue to push down on what we know, from research and from, as the experts on the table, well really, okay, we're experts because we have learned from the families that we are serving so much. And so that's just one area I think that would be important as well, is just creating, parent survey, educator survey, what are the places where we can lean in and listen to those that we serve.
And I'll say a little bit about research itself. So how do we conduct the research on early childhood, on the workforce, on program quality, on program models, and who's doing the research? So who's formulating the questions? Who's funding it? Who's asking who's helping to really identify how it's being conducted? Is it representative? Representative to who? From the margins into the that, all of those questions. So there's a New York City Early Childhood Research Network that we are a part of and conveners of, and we're specifically asking those questions of researchers and bringing in policymakers to speak with researchers to have these really rich conversations about what do you need to know, but then also how are we conducting the research to make sure that we're really telling a full picture of what's happening.
I would also say, on the micro level, what are you also doing with that research and the data in return? right? So I want to piggyback on the earlier question in regards to like partnerships and how you're defining them and what are you doing. So we went through, and we have launched a pilot program, our Family Resource Center, in which over the past year we did our own internal assessments of like, what are our strengths, what are our weaknesses, what are the areas that we can actually continue to do well internally, and then what are the areas that our local partners can maybe potentially step in because they're the subject matter experts in that, right? Sometimes our programs can get carried away and saying, we want to provide all these services to our families, and then you stretch yourself out so far that now the services that you're providing are subpar and aren't actually meeting the needs. And that's okay to assess that. That's okay to say internally, we tried this, right? We learned, this is what we learned, this is what our takeaways are. These are things that we can still own, but then who else in our network now can we like engage with? Who is this data important for us to share this with, right? And really targeting what that support system is going to look like, because this is a long run, right? We need to continue to be self-advocating, and we need to be like that annoying child in the classroom, essentially, right? That needs that attention, but they're not really being annoying. They're saying, hey, pay attention to me. I'm here. I matter. I value. Can we engage, right? So how are we engaging, not just internally on a micro level, right? How are we taking that further?
Thank you, and as I pose this last question to the panel, I also invite others to come up to the microphone if you have particular questions for our panelists. But I'm curious, given your contributions to this brief, or just your individual experience and expertise, what is your biggest takeaway on the issue of inclusive preschool classrooms? Very open-ended.
So this one will come as a surprise to many, but I think a big takeaway that you'll see in the piece is around quality and what high quality programs look like and who's in high quality programs, whether they're for fee or for free. But quality is critical, right? And so when we think about quality, we have to think through, the attention to developmental milestones, the developmentally appropriate pedagogy, the culturally relevant content, and the work has to be driven by brain science. Ed Trust did an analysis you'll see in the piece of 26 states early childhood preschool work. And 3 and 4 year olds, 1% of Hispanic babies, 1% of Hispanic babies were in high quality programs in 26 states. That's over half, right? 50 states, 26 states. 4% of Black babies are in high quality programs. That's problematic, right? And it's something that needs to be addressed.
I will say that an astounding number that you're going to see on the brief is that 50% of early childhood eligible children are not in a program receiving adequate support that they need, right? That is, regardless of how much money is out there, regardless of what we're doing, we're not capturing 50% of the population that needs support. That's important. That's important to highlight, right? And that's important to highlight internally because, so I sit at the intersection of finance and programming. I get energy from walking through the floors and going into integrated classrooms because it becomes real to me at that point. But if I only sit in a policy role where I'm disconnected from programming, if I only sit in a finance office where I'm just crunching numbers and trying to like clear the balance, and then I'm not actually interacting with the families, the purpose, the mission, right? That's why the story is so important. Not just quantitative or qualitative information. It's really important because it really drives that need where I can just sit somewhere in an office and say, okay, I need to cut $120,000 from this program. But then if I go down and I talk to programming, they said, well, that's my special education teacher. And we have 25% special education needs in our 3s and 4s program. I can't cut that special education teacher now. And now it's pulling at my heartstrings to figure out what else can I then do so I'm making sure I'm not cutting that resource for the program. And so I guess my biggest takeaway is, who are you bringing into your ecosystem? Like, do the tours, bring people into your spaces so that then they can go out and be the champions for the work that needs to be done. Right? Be the champion within the area that you can control, but engage with others so that they can then leave your space and be that advocate. And you might not see that right away. You might not see it in 6 months, you might not see it in a year, right? But we were in this room 3 years ago. And 3 years later, I would say that the environment is a lot better. It's a lot more welcoming. And the environment is going to change drastically. We don't know what's going to happen with the early childhood field, but what are we doing with the workforce? And what are the bridges that we're building there, right? So how are we creating pipelines so that this work really becomes essential moving forward? And that we're not just looked at as, okay, 50% families don't even have access to those programs. Why is that important? No, it's important because we need to get another 50% engaged. And then how do we get more parents fully engaged in the process, and how do we create the talent pipelines that can sustain growing from 50% to 100%?
I would say, for me, this is for policymakers, that the biggest takeaway is that they understand just the large benefits. So in this room, we all know the benefits of inclusive and diverse settings, but making sure that the policymakers who maybe are not champions yet, that we are hoping to influence, understand just how strongly children can acquire, better social emotional skills if they're in these settings. They can increase awareness about and understanding of different diverse perspectives from their teachers that are going to be in the classrooms, that they can, have greater acceptance of themselves but also others, and that it just prepares children for this increasingly diverse world. And sort of piggyback off of what you're saying, if our policymakers, over time understand how valuable this is, then they are interested in pushing legislation that will support increased funding for teacher pipeline, or increased funding for different services, or understand the importance of pushing a better pipeline and systems to increase the workforce. But just the biggest takeaway for me is I want policymakers, of course, to know the great benefits of this work, and hopefully that will influence what they do in legislation.
Just one thing to follow up, because I think it's important, because we talk about policymakers and systems development, and I think it's important for us as a whole, for all of us to realize we are all systems builders. Every single one of us sitting in this room are part of the systems that are affecting the children, all the children who we serve and the families that we serve. And so how do we think about our roles and where we're at, the power that we have, the knowledge that we bring, and where are we sharing that? Who are we sharing that with? Are we making sure that we're communicating to the people who are in different spaces, and then also, if depending on where you're at, who are you listening to and who are you talking to? So really thinking and recognizing each of our individual roles as systems builders within New York City, New York State, the country, so that we're building this larger inclusive system that doesn't, I want for our systems eventually to get to the point where it's not something where you have to be so creative. It takes so much time to pull all those pieces together. And if you build the system so that the pieces fit together more naturally, you can spend more time thinking about the kids.
Good morning, everyone. Again, State Senator Briscoe, he, him. I represent a state Senate district in Brooklyn. And I'll just start by talking about, I guess the generic importance of diversity. You've probably heard it a million times before, but just more and more research coming out of just how early, children internalize diversity, or lack thereof, internalize race. I remember even as myself, as a young boy, I have a very distinct memory of being like 4 years old with like a coloring book, and I was trying to color in a family, and I reached for the pink crayon because I had internalized that pink is skin tone. And I remember specifically looking at it and all of a sudden getting confused because my hand was coloring it in, and the pink crayon was not the color of my hand, and questioning why pink. I had learned from someone or at some point why I learned that pink was skin tone. So it is really important that we work to diversify the experiences of our youth, the toddlers, when they're young. And in some of the work we were doing this year, we were pushing for a universal childcare policy for the state of New York. Big, ambitious goals, but one thing that we were very certain on was that every single child must be included and every single child must qualify for a childcare system. And that includes undocumented children who are currently excluded from subsidized childcare. Which did not end up, we did not end up winning that provision in the final budget, but we have a separate bill to do it now. It's something we keep on, we're gonna keep on fighting for, because our children deserve to interact and play with each other in the same way as the world that they'll enter when they're adults.
That's great, thank you. Sherry, as the co-chair of the Governor's Early Childhood Advisory Council, you lead the council as they strengthen coordination and collaboration among the state's early childhood programs and services. No small feat on that. Can you share with us the initiatives and the work the council has done to ensure greater inclusivity and diversity within the early childhood settings?
Sure. Thank you so much. So the first thing I think I'm going to say is that for the ECAC, which stands for the Early Childhood Advisory Council, diversity is at the core and is the essence of everything that we do. When you look at the diversity of New York State, to my dear colleague Dia's point, the dimensions of diversity in New York are extraordinary. And if we just make it about one dimension or two dimensions, then we are missing people. And so what I'll say about the ECAC is that we don't, and intentionally, we don't just look at early learning. We look at the strength of families and the strength of all families. We look at the strength of health systems, including mental health, and some people really like me to say, and oral health, right? Like all the health, not just the health one or two people think about, but all of the health. And surely early learning, and to Stephen's point, every kind of early learning, every office, every place, wherever children are, matters. And so the ECAC spends a lot of time really parsing out what does it look like when every single child has what they need to everything, and not just access. So we get really caught up in the language. We talk about access. No, we talk about access to excellence. What does it look like when you have what I have and I have what you have, and it works for us, that it's not so much work to get what we need. And so, one of the things that I love about the ECAC is its membership is incredibly diverse across geographic areas, surely race, but also representation of any number of factors and places, so that voice is powerful. Parent voice, every voice belongs. And there was some discussion earlier about where are parents in the discussions. And I think that in New York City we'll see more and more about amplifying parent voice in this new administration. But it certainly is a focus, front and center in the state, within the ECAC. And very quickly there are many, many, many initiatives, because if you think about it, health, mental health, housing, family stability, early learning of all the kinds, there's lots of initiatives. But as we're talking about equity, or at least I'm talking about equity, and I think we all three are, is one example, and it won't come as a surprise to some of you that I've used this example, is Quality Starts, which is an initiative of the ECAC, and its basic premise is that people who have money can buy excellence. And people who don't have money not only can't buy it, but but they can't get it. And so how do we do this? And Head Start surely has made lots of inroads in building high quality for children of poverty. But I'm gonna say something, even with my dear colleague Yvette looking right at me, Head Start is segregated. And I know that's not, but I know we're of the same soul. We can do better. Quality Stars strives to do better. It assumes that every person wakes up in the morning wanting to do their absolute best work for children. But we as a society, we as a government, we as an agency, we prevent it. We don't allow it. It's not like we say, if you can do it, if you can't do it. No, we just say, don't, you can't do it. We're going to give you a small portion of money, so you can't do it. We're going to put you in lousy environments, so you can't do it. We decide that people will not do it. And so what Quality Stars does, for a very nominal amount of money per child, tries to flip that script and says, what do you as an educator want to do on behalf of the children you serve? And if you identify it as it relates to quality, we'll fund it. And we will stick right next to you and help you get there. Over and above that, the quality specialists across the state of New York are doing all kinds of magical things. Our specialists right this very moment that are in Western New York have their work cut out for them. There are programs in Maston Park that participate in Quality Stars, and I would be remiss to end the week without acknowledging the incredible work they're doing to just help breathe, not even heal yet, just breathe. So I'll stop there, because obviously, sorry.
Sorry about the microphone issues. We think we're all set now. Dr. Rhoda, I'd love to pose an opening question your way now. As a professor at Malloy College and author, you seek to examine ways to create a more diverse educational system and highlight the role parents play in opting into and supporting diverse settings. Can you tell us more about this work and how parents can influence the process of promoting inclusivity and diversity?
Sure, thank you. And thank you for organizing this wonderful event today. I've learned so much, and I see a lot of parallels with my work and the other panelists and others we're talking about today. So I'm a qualitative researcher. I've interviewed hundreds of parents in New York City about their choices, their school choices into preschools, into kindergarten programs, K-5 schools across the city. One of the main findings in the school choice literature and in my work as well is that parents say they want diverse educational options, but when it comes time to choose, they often choose otherwise because either they don't have those options available to them in their neighborhoods. It's very hard to get into a diverse school. You know, there are schools in New York City that have wait lists of 1,000 students. And those are integrated school systems. But they're far and few between. We know that New York State is one of the most segregated school systems in the country, and New York City is really a driving force of that segregation in the state. But we do have positive examples, and my research adds to that work. We have communities, usually in the city, it's the gentrifying communities where we see some promise of we do have a diverse community.
So I wouldn't be able to live with myself if I didn't first say that it is all about the money. Period. It is all about the money. And as deeply grateful, short of fawning on the senator, so deeply grateful am I to him for carrying this water. I mean, it's one of those water towers amount of water This is a federal government responsibility. And we were so close. And I just have to say this because, and I will answer your question, but the Build Back Better thing, there's something wrong with us, every one of us in this room, because we let that slip through the cracks somehow. Like, we won't get into what we could have, should have done, but we needed a could have, should have done something. Because that was the most beautiful design we'd ever had, in my opinion, humble, to look at the dimensions that the senator is talking about. Good for families, good for the workforce, and good for children. Those are three separate things that all must work together, and they all cost money, and there is no need to apologize for the cost. We are about to blow, and I love the Buffalo Bills, I've lived in Buffalo for many years, $1 billion, because by the time that stadium is built, we will spend at least $1 billion on it. I'm all for that, but kids come first. So it's all about the money, and you can't talk about the workforce without money. So we have spent time naively in anticipation of Build Back Better passing to create a real salary schedule for the early childhood workforce in New York State that was aligned, but even better, provided incentives all along the way to get people where they need to be so they can earn the salaries they deserve. They are not, I'm not interested in a living wage. To me, that sounds like, so you're not on public assistance, a living wage. I'm interested in a professional wage for professional work. And so we actually contend, and we have pitched this all the way to the governor's office, that a teacher in early childhood who has the same credentials of a public school teacher, but works 12 months, would earn more than a public school teacher, not the same. They do more work. There is no other industry where you could get away with saying, hey, you work 2 extra more months, but you know, it'll be on you. That would never work. It's like insanity, but we do that. We sit for that. So it's all about the money. Having said that, we have a parallel responsibility to prepare a workforce, and to prepare a workforce to be not just in the work, but being extraordinary in the work, meeting the needs of every child and wanting and appreciating and the differences in children. And so we do things at the entry level, we do things when people are in the work. We work with leadership, because if you don't help the leadership, the programs will not thrive. And that's a given. We talk a lot about teachers, we forget to talk about who's leading those programs. So we have initiatives in the Institute across the state that look at principals, directors, educational coordinators, and novel thought. We believe that we should train leaders before they become leaders. We're the only industry that thinks you can plunk somebody into a job overnight and that they're just going to be suited for that. We did a study in New York City, 93% of directors had no training, education, or experience being a leader before they were given a director's job. And then we sit around thinking, gee, what is wrong with these programs? So, leadership. Teacher preparation needs to be much, much better. We've done a study that shows that in New York State, our birth to grade 2 certification does not teach about birth or infants or toddlers. So we are working with the regions to change the way that they approve those programs to require child development and field experience with infants and toddlers. That would strengthen our work. So there's a whole bunch of things, and then we look for gaps. So one time I was in a meeting with a guy who was hired by the city of New York to help with the crisis, and this crisis remains, of adolescents who are LGBTQ, every letter you can think of, because they get thrown out of their homes, they commit suicide, they get beat up, And there he was, gonna fix the adolescent problem. And I thought, wait a minute, this happens at birth. You don't get gay when you turn 14. You're that way from the beginning. And how do we, as an early childhood field, embrace that and make that something to be honored, not to be fixed, changed, worried about, or more, or worse. So all these ways of building this workforce out are very important. And the other thing I'll say is that we have to focus on attitude and disposition and philosophical framework at the same time that we have to think about skills. And what does it mean to be able to know and do what's best for children?
It's wonderful. Thank you. Lots of kids loving the snaps from you all. Thank you for that. Dr. Rhoda, we would be remiss if we didn't have the chance to talk a little bit about the book that you co-authored, Making School Integration Work. And in that, you shared lessons from the Morris School District integration process, assist those engaged in building equitable school systems like those that we are hearing of examples here in the room. Can you share with us some of the findings from that work?
Yes. All right. So probably never heard of Morris School District in New Jersey. It's only 25 miles away from here, but it has a very unique history. In the 1960s, there were two school systems in Morristown and Morris Township. And if you can just imagine, Morristown is an urban area, and then surrounding it like a donut is the township. And the town was predominantly black in the 1960s, and the township was predominantly white. And they had two separate school systems, K-8, but the township students would send their children to the town, Morristown High School for 9 to 12th grade. Well, in the 60s, the population grew. The township wanted to build their own high school. And the people in the town and township got together and said, if we did that, we would create two separate school systems that would become segregated over time. And it went all the way to the New Jersey Supreme Court. Eventually, the New Jersey Commissioner of Education ordered the merger of the two school systems, K-12. And what that work represents and what that, that new Morris School District creation did was provided a remedy for, and the reason for the merger was for racial balance purposes. What they did was devise a unique student assignment policy so that it would, what they did was, like the Princeton plan does, they have K-2 schools and 3 to 5 schools, one in the town and one in the township. They also, their student assignment policy, if you can imagine it, the township is like a circle with the town in the middle, and the boundaries are like a pie shooting out, so that everyone is bused to their schools, and you go to one for K-2 if you live in the township or the town, and you go to the other one, the township school, for 3 to 5. This diversifies enrollments because the neighborhoods are segregated. So if you apply that to New York City, you could devise geographically based student assignment policies that would diversify student enrollments. And bringing it back to the parents cannot do this, opting in work or integration work on their own. They need systems in place. They need policymakers to devise top-down strategies like this legal remedy in Morris School District so many years ago that create the structures for this work to continue. So they have this history, this strong history of school integration. It's in their mission statement. It's something they try to live up to, even today. And that's something that I think more schools need, to have that commitment, that buy-in. And they want to make, the original school board members and everyone that created that district proud of what the work is today. And they're not there yet. True integration, we talked about today, is more than just enrollment. It's more than just race and enrollment. It's, if we think about the 5 R's of integration from the Integrate NYC student, teams in New York City that came up with that. It's race and enrollment, it's relationships, it's resources, it's restorative practices, and it's representation with teachers and staff. So that's what integration work means, and it takes a lot of work. But in New York City, they've never had a large-scale desegregation policy, and they are allowing voluntary schools to create these innovative and imaginative student assignment policies. There needs to be a large-scale effort in New York City to really change the segregation, and from my work, school leaders trying to do this work, it's very difficult with transportation, after-school programs, and resources. They don't have the support from the DOE to do this work. So that makes it even harder, and unfortunately, most schools, they don't even try to attempt it, but the schools that do are very popular schools. They're doing great work, and we need to share those stories of, possibility, like one of the panelists was talking about before, so that other schools and leaders and parents across the city see those success stories.
That's wonderful, thank you. We have a few minutes left, so we'd love to open it to you all to come up and present any questions to our lovely panelists.
And my comment was to Senator Brisbois, but just stepped out. But I just wanted to thank him for all the efforts that New York State has provided to the child care industry, especially with the Child Care Stabilization Grant, which was one of the means for programs across the city to be able to infuse and address some of the disparities that actually we're faced with, ranging from teacher parity to leadership and training, and this was a one-time opportunity. However, I can't begin to tell you how that has assisted with some of the teacher retention, with recognizing staff leadership and commitment to their programs. I'm sure it was used in a variety of ways to address longevity, but this type of funding, which was just a result of the pandemic, and we haven't really talked about the impact of how it affects our children, what's going to happen in the future, what the research will reveal in terms of their development, and the impact of the industry at large. So I just wanted to thank you for all of your efforts, and hope that we will be able to continue the support that's so sorely needed in the early childhood community.
Thank you for that. Are there other questions for our panelists? Well, I do have one. Knowing that we are the last panel, I would love to pose to you each, what is your greatest hope for young children and families here in New York? So just a nice light question to end the day. And I'll let whoever would like to jump in first.
I think it's access to those high quality centers and pre-K opportunities for all. that should be the goal that we strive for as a city and as a state.
Yeah, I'm honestly the same. I feel like the one goal I have to keep focusing on is building a universal childcare system that's as robust as our public school system, where every single parent has access to it, and the teachers are paid well and paid the wages they deserve. And it's about getting the money for it. And yes, we need the money from the federal government. The state government is lacking as well, and I will say that. I keep saying that, as a dig on myself and also my colleagues and the governor. But that's a system I think we need to still keep fighting for.
I think my vision is that New York be the absolute best place to raise a family. And in this moment, although I have felt this for the entire 45 years of my career, but now more than ever, children and families need to be safe and feel safe, feel protected, feel that they can take risk of every kind and be protected and supported. And I never say that children should have to reach their full potential. When people say that, I turn to them and say, and tell me, have you reached your full potential yet? How are you doing on that? I learned that from my son's middle school teacher about, 20 years ago. We were at parent conferences and there was a parent in front of me, and I was sitting in the back, supposedly not listening. But apparently the parent said to the teacher, all I really want is for him to work to his best potential. And the teacher turned to the parent, that is the part I heard, saying, and tell me how you're coming on that. And I thought to myself, I will remember that for the rest of my life. So, but what I do want is for every child to get to follow this path. We have these crazy conversations about gifted and talented programs. I actually love our new administration in both the education department and in the mayor's office, but I'm struggling with the notion that there is one definition of gifted and it is intellectually gifted in a certain way. In a certain way, not any of the intellectually gifted ways. And we know in early childhood that every single child comes to our doorstep with gifts. All kinds of gifts. And it's our job to figure that out, to give impact there. And so that's my vision, is that every child feels like they are powerful, they have agency, people love them unconditionally and would go to the mat for them. And we're not there yet. We have a long way to go. We criminalize our youngest Black boys. We do crazy things in the interest of, showing up. And we have to do more than show up. And that's where, that's what takes my brain and my heart.
Sherry, Senator, Dr. Broda, thank you so much for this amazing thing. We absolutely recognize the importance of early childhood education. Timely today, ironically, I received a text message from my mom earlier this morning. She is 40 plus years now retired as a kindergarten teacher. She received a message yesterday evening from a student who had just graduated with their bachelor's degree and certification to go and teach early childhood. And the message to her was, thank you for being that first teacher that showed me the passion of education and drove me down this path. Another story that I always hold near and dear, similar to your example, is, since we've mentioned Head Start so much today, the father of Head Start himself went in for surgery. Nervous, absolutely, because it was a pretty big surgery. And family members and a colleague and a friend of mine were in the room kind of at that point, and to calm him down, no one could, until the anesthesiologist in the room turned to him and said, I am a product of Head Start. I've got you because you had me. perfect examples of why we're here today. Our conversations today have just been phenomenal. And I challenge you, we challenge you as the partners and everyone else in this room to keep this going, to use today and this meeting as an inspiration to continue the conversation, to bring in more of your colleagues into this discussion, and to find those ways to continue to highlight the great innovations and the creative approaches to support the early childhood workforce that are doing this work on a daily basis.